Theoretically, you remain as your primary type for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
What you can do is to become more healthy in your type. So that's the challenge, not trying to change type, but trying to move up to higher levels of health. There are kind of a few other particular mechanisms which momentarily might take you to another type, but we won't go into that here. And you'll also always come back to home base. You'll always come back to your home type.
Yeah. So welcome on the show, Robert.
Thank you, Sebastian. Lovely to be here.
Very nice to have you here too.
Yeah.
Hey, I haven't come across the Enneagram before I met you.
Mm-hmm.
I know people have mentioned maybe the word, but I had just no reference of what it is about. What is the Enneagram in a couple of words?
Well, Ennea is the Greek word for 9. So it's a 9-pointed diagram. And each of the points represents a psychological type. So we tend to be one of those 9 types. So there are many psychological typing instruments, but I think the Enneagram is one of the most useful and one of the most deep instruments available.
Is that similar to many other typing systems based on Carl Jung's work? Or?
Yeah, Myers-Briggs, of course, is what you're referring to. And the Enneagram is similar, and you can correlate some of the types on the Enneagram with some of the types on Myers-Briggs to some extent.
Yeah.
I think the great attraction of the Enneagram is that it, having found out what type you are, it also provides a way of moving out of your type. So with Myers-Briggs, you find that you're a ENFP, and to some extent, that's the end of the story. What do I do about that?
Yeah.
And it does give some insights.
Right.
But the Enneagram also gives a lot of insights.
So what would be the main benefits for people looking into Enneagram?
Well, we run some workshops under the title of Know Yourself, Understanding Others. And I think to some extent that summarizes one of the great benefits of the Enneagram, really getting to know yourself at a deeper level. And here we are, we're strutting and fretting on the stage of life, and it's worthwhile just stopping occasionally and wondering why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What am I trying to avoid, or what's driving my behavior? And we get to be very familiar with that in other people. It's much easier to see it in other people than it is in ourselves, of course. So knowing yourself, I think, is a very important purpose in life. And we do meet people who have, over the years, been able to know and understand themselves.
Yeah. And I can see that would be a tool that any human should really have to understand how they interact with the others, and how the others act. I know that for people who are at a register, like dealing with a lot of customers, sometimes they create this wisdom themselves that they just say, they're just people, or they say they will probably just have a really stressful day, and they have quite a bit of empathy because they've seen a lot and they understand that it's not about them. But a lot of people get also triggered by other people because they act in a certain way. And if I understand the Enneagram right, having talked to you a little bit before this recording, it gives you the ability to also see, well, really, it's my stuff, and that's why I'm offended by this person, or I can see that they are acting in a certain way, probably because they were raised of it, or they're just that type. And again, I don't have to take that personally.
That's right. I mean, it's very important to be curious about our own behavior. Why am I being triggered by this other person? What's happening for me? And our temptation is often just to react or blame or get away from what's happening. Triggering is one of the great opportunities to know ourselves. What's going on inside us? What is the pain within that's being touched by this other person?
Yeah.
And that's a great window on the soul.
And where did the Enneagram come from?
Well, it had its early beginnings back in 320 AD.
Oh, wow.
With a gentleman called Evagrius, who was a monk in the desert, and he noticed in observing the other monks that although they were all dedicated to the idea of self-knowledge and connection with God, that many of them had a particular way that interfered with that connection. And he found there were 9 different ways which kept them distracted.
Wow.
And they were known as the 9 passions. And that was the foundation of the Enneagram. As an aside, there was a pope who came along a couple of years later, and he liked the idea of the passions. His name was Pope Gregory the Great. But there were 2 passions he didn't like. One was vanity, and you can understand why someone with a name like that might like vanity.
Yeah.
And the other one was fear. So he reduced it down to 7, and they became known as the 7 deadly sins, which you may have heard of.
Yeah, wow.
But not to be concerned with the goings-on of the Pope. The Enneagram went back to 9 and continues to be 9 to the present day. But it's been people have added to it over the years. The Sufis, in fact, contributed quite a lot to some of the understanding of the Enneagram. There was, but in the last 20 or 30 years, it's really been taken over by the psychologists, and they can see that it really does provide a wonderful insight into behaviour and why we do the things that we do. And we all do slightly different things depending on what type we are. So once we crack the code of finding out what type we are, it really gives us a big step up in terms of seeing our own behaviour.
Yeah.
Catching ourselves in the act.
And how do you find out what type the person is?
Well, you can do lots of online quizzes that you can do, which work up to a point. You can also recommend, you can read books and listen to what other people say about the types. So it tends to be it's not an immediate thing, but you do drop in and it becomes very clear what type you are. And that's part of the journey, of course, of discovery.
Yeah.
Yes, there I am. And when people see it, sometimes they cry and sometimes they laugh.
Wow.
Often there's embarrassment about.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I heard you saying the types could be also called coping mechanisms. Would you say?
Yeah, I think the types. It's a personality structure, and we use those structures really to cope with the world. And a little baby comes into the world, and things are happening. There's lights, there's noises, and they begin to develop ways of protecting themselves. And as they kind of go to school, move through life, they continue to develop these ways of protecting themselves. And there are 9 kind of packages that we can choose from.
How interesting that it's 9, that it's, that it's really definitive, they're not more. It's just, we're one of 9. Yeah.
And it's been consistent over the
over the
millenniums.
1600.
And the theorists say that we come in as a particular type. So we are born a type. And most mothers would agree with this, that they will tell you that little Johnny came in, and he was like this, and here he is 52 years later, and he's still behaving. There's a consistent pattern of behaviour that we hang on to.
Yeah.
And we hang on to it as a way of coping with life.
Yeah.
That's why they call them coping strategies.
Yeah. So we don't know how we become a type exactly?
No, there's a lot of research as to... it kind of seems to be there when we arrive. For instance, they've done a lot of research on twins, and they find that twins usually are not the same type. And siblings who've had the same genetic background and the same family experiences are usually not the same type. I mean, there's a 1 in 9 chance that they will be the same, but apart from that, it seems quite unpredictable.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. So and maybe it's, I don't know, it depends what you believe about how we got here.
Yeah.
And what happened before we arrived.
So the answer must be somewhere there.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's very philosophical. It's very existential.
So staying with the facts, what are the 9 different types that there are?
Okay. Well, I'll just go through them very quickly.
Sure.
Type 1 is sometimes called the reformer, and they have a mission to improve themselves, improve the world, and improve others. So a lot of the inspiring leaders of the world are type 1s. They see the potential for a better world, and they set about trying to achieve that. The downside of a 1 is that they can become kind of critical, and they become overly concerned with fixing everything. The type 2 is called the helper, which kind of describes what they do. Yeah, they're very supportive, and where would we be without the helpers in the world? And often they're part of the helping professions, nurses, teachers, and so on.
Yeah. What would be the downfall, Murta?
The upside is that they're really helpful. The downside is that sometimes, as they become less healthy, they're giving to get, so they're looking for some validation.
Yeah.
The giving is actually motivated by a need to get validation. And so they can get quite disappointed if they've been doing things for you and you forget to acknowledge what a good job they've done.
Wow.
After all I've done for you.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
And they can very easily move into a kind of martyr role.
Yeah.
3 is the achiever, and they kind of are committed to productivity and efficiency and looking good. And so many of the successful people in the world are 3s. And they're attracted to nice cars and nice clothes and often very charming people. And if you want to get a job done, give it to a 3. Their downside is that they become overly fixated on how they're presenting to the world, and they lose connection with their own feelings. So they have this kind of mask that they're presenting to the world to get some kind of validation.
In a way, superficial?
Which is superficial, yeah. And that's not really who they are. And they suppress their own feelings to make sure their performance is as good as it can be. So they don't throw a tantrum. So some of the really smooth operators, like Bill Clinton is the classic case of a very charming 3.
Yeah.
The 4 is sometimes called the individualist, and They're the kind of creative types. They want to be different. They want to be extraordinary. They're looking for depth and meaning in life. So a lot of the performing arts people are fours. They create from a deep source that perhaps none of us understand, but there is something there that they connect to. They're also the kind of tragic romantics. They really want connection. They want feelings. They're not. They want depth in relationships, and they tend to be a little bit painful at times. Oh, woe is me, and quite happy to die in a garret, just for the sheer joy of the pain.
Wow.
So we're up to 5.
So the downside is really that they...
The tragedy.
Up to 5, yeah.
The 5 is the investigator. So they love information, they love ideas. They're like the walking dictionary. So they spend a lot of time accumulating information and trying to work out concepts about the world. And often they're very innovative, and some of the great scientists and philosophers of the world, so Nietzsche is a good example of a 5. But their ability to connect with people, to have any kind of heart connection with the world, is very limited. They live in their heads, and that can be very exhausting for them.
Yeah, probably also not connecting maybe to the heart necessarily.
No, that's right. Just trying to explain everything logically. And that's, yes, a limited, like all the types, it becomes a limited way of living.
What would be number 6?
Number 6 is the loyalist. And they're very concerned with keeping things safe and looking out for others and looking after themselves, trying to make sure everything's going to work okay.
Is it people who work in the medical profession and hospitals or that, or is it more the helpers that work there?
Well, yeah, I guess it's often hard to categorize these types by profession, but 6s would love working in insurance or safety or occupational health, just looking for the things that might go wrong. They have a sense of responsibility, so they might work for local council, keeping the water systems working and keeping it going for the rest of us. They make very, in a way, although they're very concerned and sometimes a bit anxious, they also are great team players. And everyone likes 6s except for 6s.
Because they take the limelight away, the other 6s?
No, they're very worried. They can be, the downside for 6s that they become anxious. They're worried about what they should do next. They're kind of indecisive. They've lost the sense of guidance from the universe. And so at the negative side, they become anxious and worried.
And that's the downside, right?
Yeah. And the 7 is called the enthusiast. Their response to life is to lead it as fully as possible. So they're experienced junkies. They're looking for as many experiences as possible, and they get totally enthusiastic and carried away with the possibilities of life. And they tend to jam as much as they possibly can. So if you're having dinner with a 7, they'll arrive they'll arrive late and probably leave early because there are another 3 parties that they have to go to.
Wow.
So really trying to keep as busy as possible and always anticipating the future rather than actually being with what's happening now, what's happening here, what's the joy of being right here, right now.
Okay.
Instead of where am I going on holidays next week.
Right, so there's no presence
no
at the
presence.
moment. Yeah.
They're the fun people. They really, it's fun to be around a 7. The 8, the 8 is the challenger, sometimes called the boss. So they're...
Are you laughing because that's you? No.
They like to be in control of
yes.
my way or the highway. So they're the tough boss that some of us have experienced. You do it like this. They don't have a great tolerance for other people's views. So often the old traditional idea of a chief executive was the tough guy who we're going to get this done. We're going to crash through, whether you like it or not. So they like to be in control. They like to be telling others what to do, and they feel safe. They're concerned about keeping people around them that make them feel safe.
That sounds like me.
A bit like Julius Caesar, give.
Oh no, that doesn't sound like.
give me men who are fat around me.
Right, so that can be very lonely, of course.
Yeah, and not everyone wants to have a relationship with a dictator.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is probably an 8. And certainly Putin would be a very good example of an 8.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a 9, of course. The 9s are the peacemakers.
Huh.
And they're kind of easygoing, and they tend to be comfortable and kind and accommodating, and they're looking to try and bring people together and create a relaxed environment. Their downside, of course, is that they can be overly accommodating, overly agreeable. They say yes when they really mean no. And other people who are trying to relate with them often have trouble kind of knowing, where are you? It's lovely and pleasant and warm and cozy. But tell me who you really are.
Yeah, okay.
Interestingly, a lot of the mass murders in the US are perpetrated by 9s.
Wow. Amazing.
Very accommodating and agreeable, and then flip. And that's probably a gross generalization.
Yeah. But talking about generalization, is there a ratio for the world? Is it evenly distributed, or do we have only a few challengers and those run the world, and then we have a lot of helpers that sort of agree to that and support them, or is it not quite like that?
Well, there's no way of finding out, of course.
Well, I guess the people that come to your workshop might be particular types.
Yes, you have. If I was to tell you the types that come to my workshop, that wouldn't necessarily be very reflective of the population.
Oh, I see.
If you forced everyone in prison to do the questionnaire, again, it wouldn't be very reflective of the general population.
Yeah.
So I guess, my sense is that there seem to be a lot of 1s, the reformers, a lot of 2s, and quite a lot of 6s. But again, that's just my experience.
Yeah.
Probably mixing with the wrong groups.
Must be. And even though you were saying that people come in as one type, is there a way to move through that type into another one? Like, do people change throughout their life to become something else?
Theoretically, you remain as your primary type for the rest of your life. what you can do is to become more healthy in your type. So that's the challenge, not trying to change type, but trying to move up to higher levels of health. There are kind of a few other particular mechanisms which momentarily might take you to another type, but we won't go into that here. And you'll also always come back to home base. You always come back to your home type.
So there are positive traits and downfalls of each type, and if people find out what type they are, and maybe they have a consultation to find that out properly, and do a workshop, what would be an example of how they would be able to change their worldview, or how they interact with the world? Like, could you give us an example of one and how that could play out?
Well, I guess let's use one as an example. Type 1, the reformer. As we said before, the positive side is that they're trying to make for a better world. They're trying to improve themselves. They're trying to improve other people. They're trying to fix things in the world and finding out what's wrong. Having found out that they are a 1, they might be able to catch themselves in the act of doing these things. Shit, there I go again. Do I really need to be trying to fix my partner? Or am I being overly judgmental about my boss? Maybe she's not such a bad person after all. Maybe it's just my strong ideas about what she should be. So it starts to give a perspective on life, and and kind of just bringing it back to yourself. So why am I feeling like this? Why am I wanting to control and fix everybody? And why am I being so triggered by people who aren't doing the right thing? So all of these become quite tiring, of course. Fixing the world's a big job. And
so there are probably differing strengths of expression of, I guess, their type, and maybe also not only their type, but maybe also how much they are in the mode of more the downfall of that type versus the upside of being how they are.
The beautiful thing about the Enneagram, which I think is what makes it so valuable, are the levels of health. And they found that not only can we work out what type we are, we can also work out how healthy we are within our type. And there's quite a lot of accurate description about defining and seeing where you are on the levels of health. So there are things that we can do, apart from what I just talked about, of knowing what the type looks like, and being able to catch ourselves in the moment. I think the important thing about the levels of health is that at any particular point on the ladder, so to speak, when something happens, when we're triggered by someone, that's a really big opportunity to, do we want to react in the usual way? So if we're a 1, do we want to kind of go into our reform package, and which is about judgment and blame and fixing things? Or can we just stay in the presence of that and just be there with the discomfort we're feeling? And if we can do that often enough, that becomes habitual, and we slowly release ourselves from our coping strategies. And we begin to move up the levels of health to a much higher way. This is redemption. We're not being bound by these structures and coping mechanisms. We're relating from essence,
Yeah.
from authenticity, and presence.
Oh.
And it's lovely when you find yourself with someone at these higher levels of health. Yeah, you can see that there's something very beautiful going on.
Do they have names? Like, is it like a 1 to 9 or a 1 to
1 to 9?
Oh, it is actually.
Yeah.
So
that's a coincidence, isn't
yeah.
it?
And
9 types, 9 levels of health.
Yeah. Do they have names?
No.
No, it's just 1 to 9. Yeah.
They have very good descriptions of what it might look like.
Oh, okay.
But they're not names.
Yeah.
It's not like the types, the reformer.
Yes. So is there a natural progression that you would expect for a healthy person in a healthy environment, whatever that means, when they get older?
Yeah. I mean, the risk is, as we move through life, we keep building these coping strategies, and each time we react to someone, each time we go back to protecting ourselves, we're cutting ourselves off from life, cutting ourselves off from the heart. The risk is, as we get older, then these shells get thicker, and we become the poster that was around a few years ago with 3 beautiful babies across the top and 3 grumpy old men down the bottom, and the poster said, "What happened?" And what happened, of course, was they kept reacting from their type. They moved further and further into type, and protected themselves completely from the world and from all the beauty that is there.
So with that work, in these workshops, would you then assist people to find the right questions to ask when they react? I'm sure, I'm just imagine, like, if I would set up a workshop like that, I probably would create traps, like situations for that type, and say, like, I put you into one where I know that your type will react to certain things, and I will be able to point that out to you so that you learn, or have that awareness to this is one of those types, and or one of those incidences where you react. And then I guess the next step would be then, let's find a better way to mold that differently and flow through the situation without reacting.
That's broadly the hope. It's not quite as structured as that. Gotcha. But there's a lot of experiential work that we do with the people working in pairs, and just exploring why they do particular things and why. We have a thing called the repeating question. So,
is it the same question all the time?
Same question for 10 minutes.
Like, what is it? Like, why? Something like that? Like, and why?
No, it's kind of more structured than that. But tell me the ways you. Tell me on a positive sense. Tell me the gifts you have brought to the world, which is a nice question.
Yeah.
Because each of the type have specific gifts they bring to the world. And for instance, the type 1 we talked about, they tend to bring fairness and equity to the world. And so for type 1, it's lovely for them to do an exploration of the times in their lives that people have looked to them for fairness and equity. Obviously for 2, the helper. Tell me the times when you have brought support and love to the world.
It's different for each type what you actually ask there. Yeah, that makes sense.
And they become familiar with that dynamic, and they can begin to recognize that in themselves. And that's very, very beautiful.
I guess you start to accept yourself, and
often we don't acknowledge the good parts of ourselves. We tend to be a bit overly critical, and we can find what's wrong, but often we can't find the good things, the ways we do support the world.
You found that in your work, that that's a really typical human trait?
Yeah, yeah. And people often have trouble with that exercise because it's almost counterintuitive.
Wow, I wonder. That is so interesting, and it's quite sad actually, because
it is.
I think any person in my life, I could answer the questions for them.
Yes,
I know so many, good things about them, and all the beauty they bring, and there's always something. Even for people I don't know, probably I just look at them and say, like, I know that you bring the beauty, or I can see the joy, and that makes me joyous, or whatever it is. But for themselves, it's not that obvious, huh?
No, that's
Jeepers.
right. You could do it better for them than they can do it for themselves.
Wow. Yeah, we need to change that. Kids are much better with that, right? Kids are
probably,
proud about what they've done, and happy to share what excited them. Yeah,
and we just get cut off from our hearts.
This cut off. So, mentioning kids, because I'm really fond of kids and thinking they're pretty perfect, but they come in as a type. So, I just assume that when they're young, the type is maybe not as obvious or is not as much in the way. So what would trigger that progression to the type becoming a problem, the downfalls becoming more often, and the triggers and so on?
Of course, they come in with a lot of innocence and without all this craziness.
Yeah.
And as I said before, difficult things happen for them, and they begin to develop coping strategies. And of course, none of us would be alive today if we didn't have coping strategies. So we can't. We have to recognize that there is a purpose there.
Yeah.
It's just particularly if we have adverse conditions as a child, we become preoccupied with trying to survive. We don't trust the world. We know we have to protect ourselves. So, we get cut off from the innocence that we knew as a child, and so it helps having a good family life. We don't have to protect ourselves so much.
Yeah. Right. So that's an important one, hey?
Yeah. And then, if that wasn't the way it was, most of us did have some trauma in our lives, even when our parents were doing their very best. You could almost call it accidental trauma.
Yeah.
Things happened at school that were difficult for us, so we wanted to protect ourselves. So we need to start being able to see the dynamics of this, that we don't have to allow this pain to continue to accumulate. And we can start bringing some of these difficult memories of the past into consciousness. And as we do that, we're not as intent on protecting ourselves.
Right. This is something that parents can do, or that partners can do for their partners when they know that type and that type of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the best thing we can do for anyone is holding the space. So when our kids come home from school, or our partners come home from a difficult day at work, the great gift is, can we just listen? And that's one of the greatest things we can do.
Wow.
We don't have to come up with solutions. In fact, we don't. That's the worst thing we can do. But holding the space for someone and allowing them to speak about it is so valuable, and particularly for kids, of course.
Yeah.
And so that they feel held, and it's safe to express these things. They're not alone.
Yeah. Oh, that is beautiful.
Yeah.
Is Enneagram all around the world? I guess.
Yeah, it is. There is. It's probably had its major growth in the US, kind of 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But there's a thing called the International Enneagram Association, which, it is pretty much everywhere. Yeah, and they have meetings all around the world.
Mm.
You could probably find an Enneagram group wherever you go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So,
and I guess it's now beginning to move into, well, it has already in the States, into business, into the corporate world. So a lot of coaches are using the Enneagram as a coaching tool.
Mm.
And kind of how do you become more effective without the limitations of personality? How do you become more authentic?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a great coaching tool.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I guess we spend so much time at work, or the working people of our population spend so much time at work, and having that ability to have an even better time, or to because there's always that one coworker, or often actually, that rubs you up the wrong way and what have you. But I've seen that being turned around really quickly, and sometimes it's possible even without knowing these tools. But if you do know these tools, of course you can take the whole relationship with your co-workers to a very different level, and therefore bring so much more joy into your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of these coaches work with the whole team, so that they're actually not only exploring their own dynamics, but they're also exploring the dynamics between the team.
Great. And
from the lens of the Enneagram. Yeah. Why do you want to keep being in charge here?
Yeah.
Why do you want to withdraw into your room and think deep thoughts? It's why you're running around helping people all the time instead of getting on with your job.
Yeah.
So, yes, it has a very direct application in work environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that, because not only might you not get your job done, or you're unhappy about it, but if you don't get to where you want, you start to get stressed, and your mental health declines, which has so many different flow-on effects. You're on fight and flight to start with, so your body actually is getting sick, but also your relationships may suffer about it because you're stressed. You think too much about work and the conflict and so on. There's so much, and I think there's often nowadays a focus on the physical health. And we talked about that yesterday when we had a little phone call, and we were pointing out that really there's not enough focus actually on mental health, because it doesn't help you to go that extra 15, like let's say you go an hour every day to the gym and work extra hard. It will not help you with the baggage or the problems that you might have in your psyche.
Yeah. Actually, sometimes it'll make it worse. We have these addictions in life, and that can be work itself, or it can be going to the gym, or it can be helping people. But talking about, so I think psychological health is very important, and a few people in a team that are down the levels of health can have a very destructive impact on the team. They make it miserable for themselves, and they make it miserable for the rest of the team.
Yeah.
So how do we actually begin to allow them to move up the levels of health?
Yeah. Yeah.
On that, of course, if we keep going down the levels of health, we move from kind of personality structures to personality disorders. So it kind of becomes quite dysfunctional. So the reformer who's trying to fix everything, their particular personality dysfunction would be obsessive compulsive disorders. Yeah, everything needs to be right. I mean, and this only happens when they've been moving down the levels for some time. But it means that each of the types tends to finish up in a particular disorder, as if they become unhealthy enough. So there's a particular way of going insane for each of the types.
Wow. So I guess,
which is quite shocking when you think about it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I guess the lower the level of health, probably the easier it is to see the type. Would you say?
Yes, I suppose so. It becomes quite obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and their behaviour becomes even more amplified and more dysfunctional.
Yeah,
and they become more self-absorbed.
Yeah,
and less aware of what they're doing, and more convinced that it's the world that's treating them badly.
Yeah. Here's a question that I wonder whether some people listen to you and think, well, they can't help me. So I guess my question is, as long as there's a willingness in a person, no matter which level of health they are of their type, as long as there's a willingness to work through it, can it always be done, or are there the hopeless cases?
Often people need to hit a crisis before they have the willingness.
Right, that's the driver, huh?
Yeah.
The scare.
I mean, sometimes if they're lucky, they go to a workshop and they have that oh shit experience, and they start to look at their relationships differently. Sometimes that's beyond their capabilities, that they're so entangled in their personality that they can see nothing else.
Wow.
And but eventually, I always believe everyone's given an opportunity.
Yeah.
Whether it's a crisis or their partner leaving or they get fired, and hopefully at that point there's enough help around to begin the journey back up the levels. My teacher always says that once you're down at level 8, so there's 8 and 9, which is getting pretty dysfunctional.
1 is the best, 9 is the worst. Yeah.
If you're down at level 8 or 9, you actually need outside support to kind of move you back up to higher levels. You can't. The craziness that's taken you down the levels, the mind that's taken us down there isn't going to take us back out.
Yeah, that is amazing. That's beautiful. I every now and then I'm asked by people, do you know what I could do? They ask for help, not asking, can you help me, but more like, do you know what I can do? Because I know there's an issue and I don't know where to turn. Yeah. So this sounds like one of those tools that really, they're wide enough to rein people into that focus point.
Well, it's very neutral. It doesn't require any religious beliefs, or it doesn't require any beliefs at all. It just observes that there are 9 behaviours. Yeah. And most people can relate to that pretty easily. And of course, once it really just requires curiosity and courage.
Well, that's beautiful. So if people want to know more about the Enneagram and the work that you particularly do as well, where would you point them to?
We have a website. It's called the Enneagram Academy.com. There you'll find a little questionnaire that you can do, which is free. So if you want to begin the journey of finding out what type you are, that's a good spot to start. Questionnaires are inherently unreliable, so it really is just a beginning point. Yeah. There's a lot of material on the website about describing the various types, much more fully than I've described them here. There are a couple of videos on the website, and there's an excellent book written it's called The Wisdom of the Enneagram, which is written by Riso and Hudson.
Oh, that rings a bell.
Yeah, and really is a profoundly useful book.
So people who love books and want to find out, even once they might have an idea what type that could be.
Yeah, I mean there are lots of quotes and descriptions and examples, and we use it in our workshops, and it describes very well all the aspects of the Enneagram.
Beautiful. Thank you, Robert. That was really insightful. I wish I would have more time. I think you can dive deep into each type so much more. Yeah, all the nuances.
We could talk forever.
It's great. Well, thank you very much for spending the time with us. I look definitely forward to go further into that, and I'm aware of workshops that you do around the...
Yes, we've been busily cancelling workshops all year.
Yeah.
But we do workshops. They're on the website.
Yeah. Are they normally weekend workshops or also 1 day?
3 day workshops.
3 days workshops. Okay.
And it's important to have that much time to really drop in.
Yeah.
And do these experiential exercises that we've talked about.
Great. And would you recommend people to come without anyone else they know, or, is it either way?
I'm inclined for them to come alone.
Yes. Okay.
They can really do their work without being too concerned about what the other person is doing.
Very exciting.
And then maybe their partner or
there's another
can come the next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Is there anything else you want to add? Or?
No, I think we've covered the topic pretty
Brilliant.
well.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Go well.